Serious, teachers of Reddit, what red flags have you seen in your students? What happened? I'm a technology teacher, design and make. I had an 11-year-old student who was terrible at using scissors and couldn't thread a needle. She had very high grades academically, but something didn't seem quite right. I recommended she receive special assistance and a referral. And it turns out after testing that she had very little spatial awareness and almost no hand-eye coordination. After calling the parents in, we found that her mother was paralyzed and in a wheelchair. Only dad had come to parent interviews etc. And dad was very busy working to support them both. So no one had ever played any physical games or activities with her. She hadn't developed in this area. And was intelligent enough to hide these shortcomings in previous school activities. Not a difficult fix. Lots of time doing crafts. Throwing and catching balls. That kind of thing needed. But something that could have really held her back in the future. My aunt is a teacher. She worked at a school where there were many of low-income students. She was teaching a class of first graders a few years ago, and there was a little boy who would frequently ask to go to the restroom. After a while, she got suspicious that the kid either had a physical problem or was trying to get out of doing schoolwork. She sent the boy to the nurse. The nurse said that he was fine and was probably faking it to get out of class. She told the little boy that he wasn't allowed to go to the restroom anymore. This made him upset. The kid started yelling when she didn't let him go to the restroom. She called the parents in for a conference. The little boy fessed up in front of his parents about why he kept wanting to go to the restroom. Apparently, this family was so poor that they didn't even have a toilet in their home. The boy said that he would go to flush the toilet and watch the water whirl. The kid was fascinated by a toilet flush. Really made me appreciate the little things. My mom was a second grade teacher and had a little boy in her class that would go full Redrum and draw crazy things on his dry erase board. He would write things like kill with images of dead classmates. Upon asking the student why he was writing these things, he just replied with "she's telling me to." The scariest part was the boy was absolutely terrified. He didn't want to draw any of these things but felt obligated by this woman. My mom recommended him for a psyche eval and turns out he had severe schizophrenia. I had a teacher tell us, the entire classroom, that she doesn't send letters or notes home regarding a student's behavior because she once had a student come back the next day with bruises. Edit. I'm honestly so thankful for teachers like this. I didn't do too well on a bio test once. And my teacher wanted me to get it signed. Once she saw my hesitation, she withdrew immediately. Asked if I would be in danger if I had it signed. And then never sent anything home again. Bless her. As an early years teacher, the worst thing I've seen is a child trying to hump others. For example, a child bends over. He walks up behind and thrusts into them. He gets on top of a child and proceeds to hump them. Generally walking up behind them and weirdly thrusting his pelvis into others. Pinning children down into corners and doing this. Sweet kid, but that behavior rang alarm bells. I reported it on 3 separate occasions before a report was taken from me, and it went, supposedly, further up the chain. Always suspected his sister was in fact a young mum, as the mother was nowhere to be seen. I met her twice in 2 years of caring for him. Close bracket. Edit. Forgot to say he once did this to my head. Had a high school student who was a well-known white supremacist wear a bulletproof vest to school one day. Quietly called administration to come take him from class. His father complained, "Where in the dress code does it say he can't wear a bulletproof vest?" That was a big red flag. Later that year, kid was expelled for extorting money from other kids by threatening them with a screwdriver. A year later, that student got shot in the face and lost his entire nose. And he's now in prison. I have a 7th grade student this year who bugged the hell out of me. He was that kid. He smelled bad, was disrespectful and disruptive, and generally made life miserable for us. We found out about his background at a young age. His mother tried to kill him several times. She got drunk and chased him with a knife, and he only escaped by locking himself into the bathroom. She tried to drown him. She used to put out cigarettes on him. Currently, he lives with his alcoholic father who obviously hates the kid. He told me the other day that he spent the weekend going to AA meetings with both of his parents. I've made it a point to be kind to him now. I take a minute every day to talk with him and praise every positive action I see. I hope to make school something positive for him. Because I can only imagine the hell he goes home to. Nota bene. I worked in a school for seriously emotionally disturbed children as an intern, so this is from the red flag already noticed department. 8-year-old with his own giant bodyguard who followed him around to protect other children from him. He was dangerous. 7-year-old who had never spoken one word due to abuse. 8-year-old with one leg shorter than the other due to mother breaking it when he was an infant and no medical attention. -7-year-old who constantly tried to molest other kids because that was the only love he'd known. That was my entire classroom. These kids broke my heart every day that they persevered and kept trying to learn and yet had no real future ahead of them. Yes, there are miracles, but these kids wouldn't see too many of those. Worst mistake I ever made was deciding to pursue my original career rather than go into said teaching. Very rewarding work. You know when a young person learns how to curse. They don't inflect the sentence correctly and it just sounds wrong. WTF. Becomes what the? Dot. Just sounds weird. About 3 months ago. We were just having a conversation about his college application and he just said, "Yeah. Well, if I don't get into MIT, I guess I'll just kill myself." It didn't sound like a joke, it just sounded wrong. Like he inflected it incorrectly. It threw me off. I scolded him. "Hey dude. Easy. Don't joke about that stuff." This past Tuesday he committed suicide. We love that kid. He was an adult in a 17-year-old's body. I'll never forgive myself for not seeing that. I was grading papers. And one of my students was exhibiting all the red flags that she intended to harm herself in the paper. She had turned it in days previously. And I had seen her looking down that morning. So I rushed her paper down to our school psychiatrist. She moved to pull the student out of class. But she had ditched school halfway through the day. Police were dispatched and caught her literally seconds before she carried out her plan. Thank God I didn't put off grading another day. My colleague is a speech and language therapist and was working with a child with very poor attendance at appointments and a very poor background. Kid was 4 years old when she started seeing my friend after her teacher referred her in. The girl had really poor language skills and could barely hold a pen, but my colleague noticed her teeth were really bad and that she drooled a lot. Chatted to mum a bit more about her diet at the next appointment and it turned out the girl wasn't eating solid food. She had only ever been given milk with a bottle. She was taken into foster care with her little sister not long after that and they will stay in foster care till they're 18. Sadly she had to have most of her baby teeth removed, but the couple caring for them are amazing and they're hoping to adopt them both. Once had a parent find out that I'm gay. And B, I have some music industry contacts. They immediately offered me unlimited, unsupervised access to their 16-year-old son in exchange for helping him break into the music business. I was 35. I reported them immediately. So, I work in an elementary school in a very rough neighborhood. It gets way too real all the time. I think the first time this happened was when I witnessed a group of kindergartners very casually discussing the times they'd seen people get shot. Kid in elementary school who is just so angry. All the time. For no reason. He doesn't seem to feel any empathy for others. He saw another kid crying because they were upset about something and he just sat there smiling. I was giving a lesson one day and he walked over to ask a question, as I'm giving the class instructions, and I asked him to sit down and I'd help him in just a minute. He stomped back to his seat yelling about how he hates me in this school because no one cares and we're all useless. This is a nearly daily occurrence. If you tell him he has to do something he doesn't want to do, he will yell, throw things and generally just melt down. He can't deal with life in a typical way. He always seems to be scowling. I feel bad for him because it has to be hard to be him. Lots of the usual about abuse, mental illness, poverty, etc. The one a lot of folks may not know about is the phone numbers. If a parent can't be bothered to keep a way to contact them updated with the school, we're going to be dealing with a headache of a student for the year. 20 years ago I had a kid in my kindergarten class that kicked my hamster. It was in one of those plastic ball things. He was a mean, angry kid. He is in jail now. Sadly, you could see it coming even then. Honestly, the kids I've taught who've gotten into serious trouble, one in particular was just sentenced to 6 years for RP, never showed any red flags. That's the scariest thing about teaching in my opinion. Poor hygiene always makes me wonder what the home life is like. I mean, some 14-year-olds just stink. But when their hair is consistently greasy, teeth unbrushed, dirty and long fingernails, makes your heart break a little. Only read halfway down. I'm off Reddit and off to hug my kids. When I taught abroad, one of the brightest and most liked students disappeared one day after a couple of weeks with what seemed like a bad cold. Not really a red flag, I suppose, but related. It was a one-room schoolhouse in a fairly remote village. Apparently, her mother accused the lunch lady of putting a spell on her daughter and pulled her out. A red flag my mum noted was that put the class's pet guinea pig in the microwave. And then 19 years later he chopped his dad into pieces and rolled him into a rug he stored under his bed while on meth. I need to go to our uplifting news after reading this thread. My mum is a primary school teacher in Ireland. And she taught a kid in the 90s I think who was continually getting in trouble for little things and whose mother didn't give a what he got in trouble for. I was a teacher at a preschool. And one 4-year-old girl liked to play horsey with the boys during free time. Only she would make them lay on their backs and bounce up and down on them. And that's how we found out her dad was abusing her. A girl kept getting in fist fights with her girlfriend. I taught both of them and begged them to stay apart. They broke up and graduated in June. One was murdered by her boyfriend in October. It's not always the loud ones that act out either. My parents started fighting when I was 10 and my mom started telling me all these things she suspected my father was doing behind her back. It really changed my view of my dad and caused a huge strain on our relationship for years. In the end she ended up being the one cheating. I was tired and came to school and would fall asleep in class and fail tests. No one seemed to care. I spent all of my time trying to figure out what I could do to make them see eye to eye and understand each other. It consumed me and caused me to sink into depression and anxiety. I felt like I had failed because I couldn't fix it. Sometimes I still feel guilty now for not being able to save everyone. My little brother still hasn't come back from it. TLDR. It's not always the angry and loud ones. And don't fight in front of or through your children. When a kid shows up with a couple cuts, ain't no deal. When a kid starts showing up with cuts up their wrist and arms, maybe keep an eye on it. When the number of cuts and scars all over the kid just keep getting higher. And the kid who was once a 90+ average student is dropping to near failing. Something is probably up. After music class, one of my students lingered after everyone left and told me he was afraid to go home. I asked him why. And he quickly lifted his shift and showed me welts, lacerations and black and blue marks where he had been abused. He begged me not to tell anyone, because it would only make it worse. But said he wanted me to know because I was like the father he wished he had. I convinced him that he should let me connect him with professionals on staff who could offer the type of help and counsel he desperately needed. My mom worked as a special education teacher's aide when I was in elementary school. There were a lot of sad stories. Down syndrome kids who wore the same filthy clothes, underpants and all, for an entire week. And there were some that made me realize the world could be a truly terrible place. One of the worst I can remember involved a profoundly disabled girl. She was a near drowning victim and was left blind, deaf, and severely intellectually impaired. who was found to have gonorrhea. She was 11. And the reason it was discovered was because my mom saw vaginal discharge when she changed this child's diaper and reported it. I have no idea what happened to this poor girl. Maybe her next foster family was better. Maybe she went to a group home. There was one kid that I was pretty certain would kill somebody one day. Sure enough. He shot himself in the head right in front of his wife and new baby. Obligatory, not a teacher. But my grandmother. My grandmother taught 3rd grade for over 40 years. She loved every minute of it. Except for this one kid. His name was Jason. She described this kid as a psychopath. She said he would always draw pictures of knives, guns and death on the desks. One time he tried to cut himself with scissors. Another time he tried to stab another classmate in the chest with a sharpened stick. Of course. She reported every incident to the administration. But this was in a time before Columbine. So they did nothing other than suggesting counseling. During a parent-teacher conference, it was revealed that his parents lived in fear of him because he would hoard sharp objects in his room and threaten to stab anyone who tried to get near him. His parents also revealed that he killed animals for fun. Anyways, this kid was later charged with torturing and murdering 6 different women and went to prison for a long time. Kid in grade 1 had intentions of killing people and burning the school down. Not too sure how serious he was. I know he has older siblings, but they weren't troublemakers. When other students started passing the word around he was gonna do these things, the school eventually expelled him. Edit. Grammar. Edit 2. I don't know all the details of him being expelled. I do know his brother left the school a few years later, wasn't expelled. Haven't seen or heard of him since he was a little boy. I've got a 14-year-old male student that loves everything to do with war and death. The first time I saw his writing I was shocked. He was writing about killing people. Recently helping students around the room, and I see his work. Which is nicer? A sniper rifle or a bomb? Normally a kid like that would be thrown out, but this is Japan. Don't work like that. From what I've heard about America, I'm sure he would be expelled by now. Scary thing is that he looks like a normal kid. A kid always thinking about murder. Edit. So apparently this is normal. Guess I should have talked about the kid that, in the middle of class, would stand up and jump onto the windowsill and act like an animal before jumping out the window. During my student teaching, a little boy, 3, walked up behind me, smacked my butt, and said, "Nice butt." Sweetie made the click click noise and walked away. Fast forward to about 3 weeks after that. Same classroom kid comes over and grabs my boobs. Apparently he has a single father that doesn't keep his activities away from Junior. There was the kid who suddenly started wearing wristbands and tons of bracelets. I saw him itching at them. And suddenly it clicked that he had been cutting himself. I was only a student teacher then. So I told my mentor. And we found out that he was in an abusive situation. And was basically living in a locked closet at home. He also said he wanted to kill himself. I don't really know what happened to him after that, since it was near the end of my practicum there. This comment will get buried. But it needs to be posted. If you're reading this thread and you're saddened by all the broken people in the world who don't treat children properly, keep in mind that this is an Ask Reddit thread. With all that entails. What you're seeing is a collection of the worst stories people care to share. Provided by Reddit's whole user base. There are a colossal number of people with accounts. So it shouldn't be surprising that there are a lot of stories here. If it seems like these kind of bad people are everywhere, remember that you're not seeing a random sample of people. You're reading all the badness collected into one place. Many parents treat their children and others as they should. It's sad that not everyone does. But don't let yourself believe that most parents are like that just because of this thread. There are enough people on Reddit that you're going to see the worst humanity can offer here. And also the best. It's a statistical certainty just because so many people are here. Don't let it get you down. As a preschool teacher, thankfully, there aren't many times I see red flags in students. Unfortunately, there is one former student whose mother I am still in contact with who I am very worried about. I'm not a psychiatrist, but this young kid has some big issues. Something like multiple personalities, maybe because she describes her child as snapping out of it when he comes back from doing bad things. Bad things like killing a 2-week-old kitten. It really scares me that in 10 years or so I'm going to hear their names on the TV or radio. Or see it on the front page of the news. After an out-of-town track meet, the coach took my sister's team to have their picture taken at one of those places where they could dress up and do a theme picture. The way my sister tells it, the girls wanted to dress up as something wholesome, but the coach was very insistent that they do the Wild West theme. They didn't, so he dressed as a sheriff and 20 of these 14-18-year-old girls dressed as Wild West prostitutes. My parents were obviously furious. I was putting my preschoolers down for nap near Christmas time. So we're all talking about what they want for Christmas or Hanukkah. We had 1-2 Jewish students, so I discussed them both equally. One student, who was living his grandparents because his mother was abusive, told me he wanted to play video games. Oh, like on a TV or in your hands? Like a DS? He was 5. He sat up, very excited to tell me the story of how he used to have a DS and it was awesome. But one day some men broke into the house and stole it. It was so heartbreaking. Especially because he seemed to react as if it happens a lot. I called his grandparents and got permission. But my husband let me give him his old DS he didn't use anymore and all the games he had for it. As we were walking to the library, a student noticed a baby bird had fallen out of a nest. He proceeded to pick the baby bird up and bite its head off. Seriously. I registered for a STIT specifically to comment on this. I couldn't believe the timing. I teach at a private PS8 Catholic school in New England. Just last week I had a kindergartner, age 5, walk up to a framed group picture, hold his hands like a gun, and shoot each person individually, moving down the line. Slowly. Looking each person in the face before the shooting motion. All the right steps were taken after this. But I couldn't believe my eyes. I was the red flag. But I haven't seen anything related to drug use. So here goes. Sophomore year I had a great AP literature teacher. I had a bunch of seizures in her class. Most people didn't catch on to the cause. But she knew it was a drug thing. She very subtly approached me about it. First, she complimented a recent essay I'd written, despite the fact I honestly didn't read the book it was on. I just rolled with it. And then suggested that I might do better if I spent my lunch hour differently. I stopped getting high at lunch. Mostly from the POV of a student. I tried killing myself once and was admitted to the hospital. It was this whole big thing and I missed a lot of school from it. Most of my teachers were understanding that since I basically just vanished from school. Something serious had happened. But I had one teacher who assumed I had dropped the class and decided to completely disregard me as a student in that class. I ended up failing that class because she refused to be understand of my situation regardless of how good my grades were before everything went to. Basically what I am saying is that to all the teachers on this thread, a little reaching out when a student starts to pull away can make a huge difference. Graded a lab report by a SE Asian kid. Then graded another later that was eerily similar down to the typos. Noticed it was another SE Asian kid. Talked to my fellow TAs. Compared the papers of the first 2 Asian kids' friends. And before long there were literally dozens of nearly identical lab reports all across the department. You know they were all cheating together because they had the same writing errors. You haven't known chaos until dozens of Asians are harassing you in the department because they think it's racist to flunk most of the Asians in an OChem class. Department laughed them out thankfully. The ringleaders were removed from the university. They might have not been if they had apologized, but they were obnoxious and refused to take responsibility. And everyone else failed the course and went on academic probation. If you're gonna cheat, at least rewrite the lab report you're sharing with 50 people. I'm not quite a teacher. But I'll look after a group of 8th graders. I'm a prefect. One of them was a really angry kid who would always try to fight people. He would never study, despite the protests of his family, and hated school. Most people thought he was just an angry kid. Until one day he let slip that he'd been self-harming and had suicidal thoughts. He withdrew from school to get counseling help and we haven't seen him since.